January 26, 1943. Thursday. The North African morning was unnaturally quiet, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. The sky was clear, mercilessly blue, stretching endlessly over a battlefield still marked by the scars of recent defeat. Burned-out American vehicles lay half-buried in sand. Abandoned helmets and torn maps told the story before anyone spoke it out loud. Only days earlier, at Kasserine Pass, the United States Army had been humiliated. German armor had cut through American lines with precision and confidence. Units had broken. Officers had hesitated. Men had run. For the first time since entering the war, America looked vulnerable. German commanders were pleased. They believed they had learned something important about their new enemy. The Americans, they concluded, were brave but untested, rich in equipment but poor in experience. To men like Erwin Rommel's staff officers, the outcome seemed inevitable. Given time, the German army could bleed the Americans dry before they ever learned how to fight properly. Inside Allied command, the mood was darker. Defeat was one thing. Public humiliation was another. British officers exchanged glances that said what they did not dare speak. The Americans had failed their first real test. Something had to change, and quickly. That morning, a new commander arrived. General George Smith Patton did not arrive quietly. He never did. His boots were polished to a mirror shine. His uniform was immaculate, almost defiant in a landscape of dust and exhaustion. He carried himself with a rigid confidence that bordered on arrogance, but behind it was something sharper. Patton did not see an army that had failed. He saw an army that had not yet learned how to win. He wasted no time. Within hours of taking command, Patton issued orders that shocked exhausted troops. Helmets were mandatory at all times, even miles behind the front. Sloppy dress was punished. Salutes were enforced. Units were drilled relentlessly. Retreat without explicit orders would end careers. Officers who hesitated were replaced. Patton believed discipline was contagious, and fear was a weapon that could be aimed. To some soldiers, he seemed cruel. To others, he felt like exactly what they needed. Patton walked the lines personally, staring men in the eyes, demanding confidence where fear had lived days before. He spoke not of defense, but of attack, not of survival, but of victory. He reminded them that the Germans were human, that they bled like anyone else, and that fear worked both ways. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, something changed. German intelligence noticed first. Intercepted radio traffic sounded different. American units no longer panicked at first contact. They maneuvered, they counterattacked. Patrols grew bolder. Artillery responded faster. German officers began reporting that the Americans were behaving less like amateurs and more like professionals. No one mentioned Patton by name at first, but the pattern was impossible to miss. By February of 1943, American forces under Patton were testing German positions aggressively. By March, they were launching coordinated attacks with growing confidence. Patton pushed his men hard, not because he enjoyed punishment, but because he believed speed and pressure denied the enemy time to think. He was right. May of 1943 arrived with an ending few had expected so quickly. Axis resistance in North Africa collapsed. Hundreds of thousands of German and Italian soldiers surrendered. Prisoner columns stretched for miles. It was one of the largest capitulations in the war. For American troops, it was redemption. For Patton, it was proof. But victory brought attention, and attention brought danger. Patton's name began appearing in newspapers. Soldiers talked about him. German prisoners remembered him. Allied officers, especially British ones, began watching him carefully. He was effective, yes, but he was also uncontrollable. Patton did not know how to be subtle. He did not soften his language. He did not hide his ambition. And that made powerful people nervous. July 10th, 1943, Saturday, Allied forces landed in Sicily. The operation was meant to be orderly, controlled, and cooperative. Bernard Montgomery's British 8th Army was designated the main effort. Patton's American 7th Army was assigned a supporting role, tasked primarily with protecting the flank. Patton accepted the orders. He did not accept the limits. As the campaign unfolded, Montgomery's advance slowed against determined German resistance and difficult terrain. Patton watched carefully. He saw hesitation where he believed speed was required. He saw opportunities opening along the western coast of the island. Without waiting for approval, Patton pushed forward. The drive to Palermo was lightning fast. American armor raced along roads the Germans believed unusable. Infantry followed with relentless momentum. The city fell quickly, stunning both the enemy and Allied command. Patton had turned a supporting role into an offensive of his own. The campaign became a race. Montgomery was furious. He believed Patton was stealing glory and disrupting coordination. Patton believed Montgomery was moving too slowly to end the war decisively. Their rivalry sharpened with every mile gained. Staff meetings grew tense. Orders were obeyed in form, but challenged in spirit. August 17, 1943, Thursday. Patton's troops entered Messina just hours before Montgomery's lead elements arrived. Sicily was secured. The island was liberated. The headlines followed Patton, and that was the moment everything began to turn against him. Because Patton was no longer just a general. He was becoming a symbol of aggressive American power, a symbol that threatened carefully balanced Allied politics. Only days earlier, August 3, 1943. Tuesday, an incident had occurred that would change Patton's fate. Inside a military hospital, Patton encountered a soldier suffering from what was then called battle fatigue. In a moment of rage and frustration, Patton struck the man, accusing him of cowardice. The act was witnessed. The report traveled upward. At first, it moved quietly. Then, it reached Eisenhower. Eisenhower understood Patton's value on the battlefield. He also understood the damage Patton could do off it. When the incident became known, the reaction was swift and severe. Patton was forced to apologize. He was removed from frontline command. Publicly, it was discipline. Privately, it was containment. Patton had gone from hero to liability overnight. German intelligence noticed immediately. As months passed and preparations began for the invasion of Western Europe, Patton was nowhere near active combat commands. To German planners, this confirmed their fears. They believed the Allies were hiding Patton for something decisive. They believed wherever Patton appeared, the real blow would fall. June 6, 1944. Tuesday. Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy. Patton was not there. Instead, his name was used as a weapon. Fake armies were created. False radio traffic flooded German intercept stations. Inflatable tanks appeared in fields. German reconnaissance reported American formations that did not exist. All signs pointed to one conclusion. Patton would lead the real invasion at Calais. German reserves waited. While they waited, Normandy held. The deception worked perfectly. Weeks later, when Patton was finally unleashed, the effect was immediate and devastating. August 1, 1944. Tuesday. Patton assumed command of the Third Army. What followed shocked both sides of the war. His forces exploded across France with breathtaking speed. Entire German units collapsed. Prisoners surrendered in waves. Towns fell before defenses could form. Supply officers struggled to keep up. Fuel shortages plagued the Third Army, but Patton refused to slow. German commanders were stunned. They expected Patton to attack. They did not expect him to move like this. And this is where the story turns darker. Because just as Patton reached the peak of his power, the forces that feared him most were no longer German. They were Allied. August 5th, 1944. Saturday. The roads of northern France trembled under the weight of steel. Columns of American tanks rolled east in endless lines, engines roaring, dust rising like a storm that refused to settle. Villages that had lived under German occupation for years woke to the sound of liberation, only to watch it rush past them at terrifying speed. Patton's Third Army was no longer advancing. It was flooding across Europe. Inside German headquarters, reports arrived faster than officers could process them. Entire units had vanished. Defensive lines collapsed before they could be reinforced. Commanders asked the same question again and again. Where would Patton strike next? No one could answer, because Patton himself did not always know until the moment arrived. He believed speed created its own intelligence. German generals had faced aggressive enemies before. They had never faced one that refused to pause. Patton's headquarters moved constantly. Maps were rolled up, unrolled, redrawn, then abandoned as reality outran planning. His officers struggled to keep pace, but they also understood something important. As long as Patton kept moving, the Germans could not recover. Every hour of pressure denied them time to reorganize, to refuel, to think. But momentum has an enemy more dangerous than resistance: logistics. Fuel became the invisible battlefield. Patton's tanks burned gasoline faster than Allied planners had predicted. Supply trucks lagged behind. Rail lines were damaged. Ports were congested. And above all, decisions were being made far from the front. At Supreme Allied headquarters, the mood had changed. Patton's success was undeniable. So was the problem it created. His advance threatened to pull the Allied front out of balance. British commanders worried that an American breakthrough too far south would marginalize their own forces. Political leaders worried about who would stand where when the war ended. Bernard Montgomery watched Patton's progress with growing frustration. To Montgomery, Patton's advance was impressive, but dangerous. He believed the Germans were retreating strategically, not collapsing completely. He argued that, without a single controlled thrust, the Allies risked extending themselves too far. Montgomery had a plan. He wanted priority. Priority in fuel. Priority in supplies. Priority in reinforcements. His argument was simple and persuasive to politicians. One decisive blow in the north would end the war quickly and cleanly. Everything else, he argued, was wasteful dispersion. Eisenhower listened. Patton felt the change before he saw it on paper. Fuel deliveries slowed. Requests were delayed. Orders arrived telling him to pause, consolidate, and hold. To Patton, this felt like suffocation. His army was built for movement. Stopping it was like ordering a shark to sleep. He raged in private. He wrote bitterly that the war was being prolonged by caution and ego. He believed the German army was on the brink of collapse, and that hesitation was the only thing keeping it alive. German commanders noticed the shift with disbelief. They had prepared for another blow. Instead, pressure eased. Reconnaissance patrols reported fewer American probes. Defensive positions that should have been overrun remained intact. For the first time in weeks, German staff officers allowed themselves cautious optimism. If Patton had been slowed, perhaps the Western Front could be stabilized. September arrived with rain and mud. September 17, 1944. Sunday. Montgomery launched his long-awaited offensive in the north. Airborne troops dropped behind enemy lines. Bridges were seized under fire. For a brief moment, it looked like the gamble might succeed. Newspapers hailed the boldness of the plan. Politicians spoke of imminent victory. Patton watched from the south, constrained and furious. As days passed, the offensive stalled. German resistance stiffened. Supply lines strained. What was meant to be a decisive stroke became a grinding struggle. Patton believed the outcome confirmed everything he had warned about. Speed without flexibility was useless. Momentum had been wasted. Inside German command, relief mixed with surprise. The feared American general had been held back. The Allied attack had lost coherence. For the first time since Normandy, Germany was not simply reacting, it was surviving. October bled into November. The front hardened. Rain turned fields into swamps. Soldiers dug in. Patton fought brutal battles in Lorraine, forcing river crossings and smashing fortified positions. But he knew these were not decisive blows. They were expensive, grinding fights forced upon him by strategic restraint. Winter crept in silently. By late November 1944, cold winds cut through uniforms and morale alike. Snow dusted forests and fields. The war slowed, not because it was over, but because both sides were exhausted. To many Allied officers, winter meant consolidation and defense. To Adolf Hitler, it meant opportunity. December 16, 1944. Saturday. Before dawn, German artillery erupted across the Ardennes forest. Shells shattered the silence. Roads clogged with retreating vehicles. Communications collapsed. American units were caught off guard, spread thin across what was believed to be a quiet sector. Panic spread quickly. Inside Allied headquarters, maps were redrawn in real time as German armored columns punched west. The front bulged outward like a wound. Hitler had committed his last reserves in a desperate gamble to split the Allied armies and force a political settlement. Patton did not panic. The moment reports reached him, he understood the nature of the attack. This was not strength. It was desperation. Germany was bleeding its final reserves in one violent thrust. And desperation, Patton believed, was exploitable. He began planning immediately. At a high-level meeting, Eisenhower asked what options were available. Patton did not hesitate. He proposed turning his entire army north and attacking the German flank. The maneuver would require moving hundreds of thousands of men, vehicles, and tons of supplies through winter conditions. Eisenhower asked how long it would take. Patton answered calmly, "Days." The room fell silent. Some thought Patton was exaggerating. Some thought he was reckless. Eisenhower studied him carefully. He had seen Patton deliver the impossible before. This time, Eisenhower agreed. Patton's army pivoted like a giant machine snapping into alignment. Tanks turned on icy roads. Engineers worked through the night repairing bridges under fire. Infantry marched through frozen forests, breath turning to frost in the air. Orders moved faster than the weather. German commanders were stunned. They had expected American paralysis. Instead, Patton's forces appeared on their flank with terrifying speed. The German offensive began to unravel almost as quickly as it had begun. December 19, 1944. Tuesday. Patton's relief forces broke through to Bastogne. The siege was lifted. American morale surged. German momentum collapsed. Once again, Patton had done what others believed impossible. For a brief moment, his instincts were vindicated completely. As the Germans retreated, Allied armies surged forward again. The winter offensive bled Germany dry. Roads filled with surrendering soldiers. German officers begged to be taken prisoner by Americans rather than risk capture by Soviet forces advancing from the east. Patton noticed. He noticed the fear. He noticed the desperation. He noticed the way German units disintegrated rather than fight on. To Patton, the war's end was no longer a question. It was a race. And Patton believed the Allies were losing that race without realizing it. Third part, January 2nd, 1945, Tuesday. The snow along the Western Front lay thick and silent, broken only by the rumble of engines and the distant crack of artillery. Germany was dying, but it was not dying quietly. Its armies were exhausted, hollowed out by years of fighting, yet still dangerous in their desperation. Across the front, American, British, and Soviet forces pressed inward like tightening jaws. Patton did not see a defeated enemy. He saw a collapsing one. As his Third Army pushed east, German resistance dissolved unevenly. In some towns, white flags appeared before American tanks even slowed. In others, isolated fanatics fought briefly and then vanished. Roads filled with prisoners. Officers surrendered whole units at once. German soldiers no longer asked if they would lose. They asked who would capture them. And more often than not, they begged for Americans. Patton noticed the pattern immediately. Interrogation reports repeated the same fear again and again. German soldiers spoke of the Soviets in hushed tones. They spoke of what happened to towns taken from the east. They spoke of disappearance, revenge, and annihilation. Patton listened carefully. To him, this fear was not propaganda. It was intelligence.